Hey everyone, Tin Man here with a guide for a deck that I've long been interested in, Red-Blue Midrange. It combines the dominant early game of red with the powerful spells of blue. It is probably the closest thing to a pure midrange deck we have seen in Artifact, because it is able to play aggressively or defensively equally well, depending on the matchup. I've always been interested in this color combination, since red and blue seem like such a natural pairing. Red's strong heroes cover for the weak blue heroes, and the blue spells help to snowball leads on the board, rather than just catch back up to your opponent. But there are so many good heroes and cards to play in this color combination that I never found a build of it that I felt was clearly the best. This list was brought by Life Coach, Mr. Yagut, and Super JJ to the We Play Esports Agility Tournament Finals. I think it is a great starting point for this guide, but keep in mind this archetype is very flexible and you can adjust the heroes to suit your playstyle and to counter the meta you're seeing. Let's break down some of the hero options. Regardless of the build, you probably want Legion Commander, Bristleback, and Kana. Legion Commander's duel is crucial to any red deck, acting as a cheap removal to help clear out opposing heroes or creeps, and gaining you a ton of tempo in the late game. Bristleback is simply the best early game hero, and his signature card pairs well with Legion Commander's Retaliate and Ogre Magi's Ignite. Kana is the best blue hero because of her high health total, making her hard to remove, plus her incredibly potent signature card, Prey on the Weak. That card can single-handedly win games against opponents who aren't prepared to deal with all the creeps it spawns. After those three, you need to decide if you want to go with 3 red or 3 blue heroes. 3 red heroes gives you a better early game, while 3 blue heroes gives you more powerful spells and a better late game. If you go with red, Axe is generally the pick. His signature card is great with at least 3 red heroes, and his stats are still nothing to sneeze at after the nerf. Urza is another option if you build around him. His passive allows you to stack negative armor on opposing heroes, making them easy to kill off with Ignite, Conflagration, or other AoE damage. I haven't found him to be too great, since it is very inconsistent that he'll be able to attack heroes every turn, and his signature card is not great if you have a lot of blue heroes in your deck to play those AoE cards, but the idea is out there, and I would be very curious to see if anyone can make him work in this style of deck. For your second blue hero, you generally want Ogre Magi. His signature card Ignite can give you early board control and lets you set up a massive Prey on the Weak, and his multicast is a nice little bonus for when you get an extra spell here and there. If you want to go with 3 blue heroes, Luna is typically the next hero you want. Her signature card Eclipse is much more powerful in this style of deck than it is in other mono blue decks. If you are already ahead on board, Eclipse will seal the deal and win you the lane, rather than just salvage a losing situation. Zeus is another option. I generally think he's a bit weaker than the other blue heroes, but his signature card Thunder God's Wrath can set up some crazy late game swings, especially if you pair it with Aghanim Sanctum to cast it multiple times in a row. Regardless of what heroes you choose, there are some key cards that you're going to want in any version. Bronze Legionnaire and Stonehall Elite will establish early board control, while Prey on the Weak and Dimensional Portal can help you get wide and go aggressive early. These will ensure that you have powerful plays to take control of the board in the opening 2 turns. At Any Cost and Annihilation are simply amazing board clears. In other card games, board clears fully reset both players, but in Artifact they only affect one lane. This means that you can choose where and when to deploy these board clears to ensure that you devastate your opponent's plans without impacting your own by very much. Frankly, I think both of these cards are just too good right now, and I wouldn't play a blue deck without the full set of each of them. Time of Triumph is the premier finisher of this deck, buffing your ordinary heroes into Super Saiyans and cleaving and sieging their way down to the tower. Definitely the best way to win the game. Those cards will make up the bulk of your deck, but there are still some slots that you can be a bit more flexible with. Smash Their Defenses is a card that I've been a little bit down on recently. I feel like the tempo loss in the lane when you cast it can often be a little bit too much, especially since they may have gotten some value from their improvement right away, such as Mist of Avernus or Ignite. It also just sits in your hand sometimes with no targets in sight. I'm not opposed to running 1 or 2 of them, but I'd be cautious about running too many. Foresight. This card is a much less narrow way of drawing cards than Smash Their Defenses, and it's a good way to keep your hand full into the mid to late game. You'll typically want 2 or 3 copies in most builds of this deck. Aghanim Sanctum, it's a card I'm not the biggest fan of, especially in a deck like this. It doesn't impact the board on its own and doesn't draw you into more cards that do. It does make some sense in decks that have more card draw, like say Mono Blue, or a heavier controlling version of this deck. But if you're going more mid-range and board-centric, like the list I presented, I don't think it has much of a place. If you go with the more controlling version, perhaps with Zeus, it can be good to chain his Thunder God's Wrath together. Arcane Assault and Fight Through the Pain. These are some initiative cards that you're going to want some number of. The list I included here only included 1 copy. Personally, I think that's a bit low. I generally will shoot for 2 to 3 of them, especially when you can set them up with Annihilation. Typically, if you run 3 red heroes, you're going to want Fight Through the Pain, and if you run 3 blue, you'll want Arcane Assault. It gives you the most flexibility of when to deploy your crucial initiative play. Spring the Trap is another option. This card is best when you're ahead. When you're winning one lane, you can use the mana on that lane to affect a later lane, pushing your advantage even more. I generally like just 1 copy because they aren't that great when you're behind, but more and more people have been adding a 2nd copy, so maybe I'm wrong on my take of just 1. Enough Magic. This is good into the ramp and mono blue matchups to deny some of their big plays. You generally want it when you're already ahead on board, but you aren't ahead in all matchups, such as against mono red or red black decks. So I'd only consider this if you're playing against a lot of mono blue and ramp decks. Routed is a card that is very good against mono blue, and it's particularly good in red blue because you have Annihilation to ensure that you can kill off multiple opposing heroes at once. It's particularly good against mono blue since their heroes die so easily, not just to Annihilation, but to your combat, and you want to keep them off Bolt of Damocles mana. Speaking of which, Bolt of Damocles is an option that you can include in this deck. Including a copy of this helps to fight the late game versus mono blue. Suddenly you have the same late game pressure that they have, and being able to kill the tower through the combat, before the combat step, so they can't mess you up with Annihilation or Eclipses of their own. The final option here, Compel and Cunning Plan. These kind of combat tricks are a bit better in a version with more blue heroes, but even then, I'm not sure they're worth it. They're really good in mono blue decks because the deck just needs to cycle to its big late game cards, and they have weak heroes in every lane early on. Red-blue doesn't rely on finding that Annihilation every single game, and it has more powerful heroes early who don't need to be saved with a Compel or Cunning Plan. Let's move on to some gameplay tips and talk about the specific matchups. The list I presented here runs Kana on the flop, who will rarely die on turn 1. That means your melee creeps will spawn into her lane. That also means that if there's an opposing hero is unblocked in other lanes, they'll continue to be unblocked until your Kana dies. Don't take too much tower damage in those other lanes if, say, a Bristleback is just hitting your tower every turn. It'll put you in a tight spot come the mid to late game, so you want to use Bronze Legionnaires and Stonehall Elites to save some of that damage. Related to the Kana creeps, Ogre Magi deploys on turn 2, and he'll generally want to go into another lane, not into Kana's lane, because then you have 2 blue heroes in the same lane. That means he may generally land in front of an opposing hero and die right away. That's okay, don't worry too much about that. If he dies on turn 2, that means he'll respawn on mana 6, just in time for Annihilation. You want to set up Ignite early to make a huge Prey on the Weak on turn 2 if you can. This is one of the most devastating combos in the early game and can easily snowball the lane to victory. Like all decks with Legion Commander, try to avoid using Duel early on opposing heroes. It's far more impactful to deny the heroes later in the game rather than on turns 1 and 2. Speaking of killing off heroes, try to time the opposing hero's death such that multiple heroes are going to die in a single turn rather than once per turn. This gives you the most tempo advantage and sets yourself up for a good routed. When considering whether to Dimensional Portal or Foresight in the early game, consider your role in the matchup. If you are the aggressor, Dimensional Portal early is the best way to push the tempo and push damage. If you have to be more defensive, and you have the opportunity to deploy Foresight without taking too much damage, it's probably wise since you may not have another opportunity. I cannot stress enough how important knowing your role in the matchup is. Compared to many other decks that have straightforward roles, this deck must be flexible. If you try to play aggressive when you should be defensive, or vice versa, you can easily lose a winnable matchup. Let's get on to more specific matchup notes. Versus Mono Red. This is another mid-range style deck, and the role you need to play depends on each player's draw and the version of the deck you're running. If your opponent is running a Centaur Warrunner and Timbersaw version, they will likely be the aggressor, since they have many more early game cards. If they're running a Tidehunter and Beastmaster version, their late game can be devastating, so try to play more aggressively. Most non-blue decks struggle to counter wide boards, and Mono Red is no exception. They have no annihilation or anything like that, so feel free to go as wide as you like. Versus Mono Blue, in this matchup you need to be aggressive. Their late game removal and Bolt of Damocles will punish you if you let the game drag on. Being aggressive can be tricky though, since they have answers to a wide board, specifically Ignite is annoying to deal with. Try to smash their defenses on the Ignite if they have it early, and just avoid putting too many creeps into that Ignite lane. Having Time of Triumph is extremely important in the late game, and you want to cast it as soon as possible. If you're really concerned about this matchup, adding your own Bolt of Damocles or Clashream Hourglass can help you keep pace in the late game. Red-Green Ramp. Unlike Mono Red, you always need to be the aggressor here, since their late game is very scary with Time of Triumph and Emissary of the Quorum. Just like Mono Red, however, they are weak to the wide board states, so focus on using Dimensional Portal and Prey on the Weak to go wide, push early damage. Even if they Time of Triumph, it may not be enough to contain all of your blockers. You can also use Annihilation to prevent critical Time of Triumph turns, whenever they cast Stars Align, for instance. You should also try to deny them gold when you can, with TP Scrolls or Revtel Signet Rings. Once they cast Time of Triumph or Emissary, they'll need Blink Daggers to get to other lanes and spread their advantage out. If you can deny as much gold as possible, they may not have as many Blink Daggers as they want, stranding their heroes in that single lane. Versus Red-Black and Mono-Black, against the more aggressive Sorla Khan decks, you need to be defensive, keeping your towers as healthy as possible. Luckily, you have a lot of tools for this, from the strong red heroes and creeps, Dimensional Portal, Ignite at any cost, and Annihilation all keep you alive. Be wary of the fast Ancient Pressure they can get, and they can get to 80 very quickly if that lane goes uncontested. Also, you should be aware of Tinker's March of the Machines, which can easily punish your Prey on the Weak. Against the more mid-range versions, it can be a little tougher as they're not as weak to at any cost. If they use Lich, they have a much more powerful late game with Chain Frost, which can wipe your board and set up a powerful coup de grace in the next lane. So try to be more aggressive against Lich versions to get them dead before Chain Frost comes online. Against any deck with Phantom Assassin, which is most black decks, be wary of a common turn 2 play, where they deploy their hero into a later lane, and then gank your hero in that lane with their Phantom Assassin. This creates a massive advantage for them in that later lane, and if the second hero is Sorla, your tower is going to be gone very quickly. Play around this by not deploying your second hero into a lane with Phantom Assassin. Instead, put it on a later lane that might get ganked. Some final thoughts. Red-Blue Midrange is a very interesting deck. It's a red deck that can go wide and deal with opposing wide boards. It is strong at all points in the game, playing offense and defense equally well. It's also very flexible, with a lot of heroes and card choices to explore. This particular list was brought to the We Play Agility Finals, but it is by no means the only way to build the deck, so definitely experiment with it and find a version that works for you. Make sure you check out my Twitch stream at tinman354, and the gameplay videos linked in the description below, where I take this deck through a constructed gauntlet with a lot of in-depth commentary and analysis. You can also check out my other deck tech videos, also linked below. Thank you so much for watching, and good luck.